righty, well it is 6:30 and I just turned on the live feed, the live stream, so welcome if you're watching online or watching later on. And we're going to finish up this series on the prophets with Ezekiel, which is a pretty freaky book. To be honest, it is some strange stuff that you might think, was he taking some odd substances when he, like this. His visions are, we talked some about the visions in Daniel last week. These are even stranger in many ways than the visions in Daniel. Ezekiel is someone who is one of the first people taken into captivity by the Babylonians. And one of the things I've kind of hinted at in the past, but when I've talked about the Babylonian invasion and the Babylonian captivity and all of that, is, when I talk about the date of 586, 586 is the date that the temple is torn down and the walls of Jerusalem come down. It's sort of the final straw of the invasion and the occupation. But it's not, like most, wars or invasions or occupations, it's not something that's just an overnight kind of thing. It's actually several years as it becomes, when it finally comes to a head and that final sort of nail in the coffin. Judah had escaped the fate of its northern sister, Israel. The northern tribes, of course, the 10 northern tribes that came to be known as Israel, whereas the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin just came to be known as Judah or Judea. The people came to be known as the Jews. That northern kingdom, we've talked about how they were conquered by the Assyrian Empire. And that date of conquering, even though it too is not just a single day or a single week, of course, is right around 722 BC. The Assyrians are kind of on the doorstep of conquering Judea too, but they don't. Judea remains free of the Assyrian armies. They are still surrounded by countries more powerful than they. And as Assyria fades, Babylon grows. And there's a point at which Babylon has not invaded Israel, or Judea, but they have begun to treat them like they talk a vassal state. In other words, they demand tribute from them. They demand taxes from them. They demand money from them, sort of to keep them from destroying them. Sort of, extortion money. And so Babylon has an influence over Judea for several years before they actually come in and just break the place up. And in that period, Judea at times is hoping to either stage a rebellion against that sort of overlord of Babylon. Other times they're looking to Egypt as an ally to help them against Babylon. That doesn't usually pan out. But from really around 600 BC, Babylon has this influence over Judea. And they are forcing them to pay, say, tribute. Well, in 597, there is a beginning of a rebellion by the Jews against the Babylonians. It fails. And because of that, Babylon starts to take some captives into Babylon. That first wave of captives is actually in 597. And that includes Ezekiel. Ezekiel is one of the first captives taken from Judea into Babylon. And so he's in Babylon for several years, for about 10 years, before the fall of Jerusalem. Now, there's a second rebellion attempted against the Babylonians in 586. That's when the Babylonians get tired of messing with Judea, and they come in and knock down the temple, knock down the walls, and then take even more captives into Babylon. So there's waves of captives, and the It goes from, you're under our thumb, we're going to extort you, we're going to make you pay tribute to us, we're going to make you pay taxes to us, to finally absolute conquering and captivity of especially as we talked about with Daniel, the best and the brightest are taken into captivity to serve in Babylon. That's why Daniel and his 3 friends are taken into Babylon, because they're from the good families, they are strong and healthy, and they are some of the so-called, best fruit of the cream of the crop who's taken into captivity. But Ezekiel himself is taken among that first group of captives. So his prophecies are taking place in Babylon. But in some of his prophecies, he's still talking about the imminent fall of Jerusalem. And so that's why it can be confusing, and I wanted to clarify that. He's in Babylon under the first wave of captives, but the actual fall of the city has not yet happened when he begins his time as a prophet. And so that's how some of this fits together. The scholars would say he was probably about 25 when he's taken into captivity. They think he's about 30 when he gets this vision that we start with in chapter 1. And his oracles, his prophecies that we read about in the book of Ezekiel are spoken over the course of over 20 years. We have a collection of his speeches or prophecies over a 20-year span, all edited together into one book. And one of the things about Ezekiel's speaking or prophesying to the Jews there in Babylon is it often was not with words, it was with some symbolic action. Like, think about somebody who is, I'm trying to pick something not too controversial here. Let's say somebody's an environmentalist, and they decide to chain themselves to a tree that's about to be cut down. And they're not even saying anything. They've chained themselves to a tree. That's their form of protest. It's not oral, it's not spoken, it's an action. Ezekiel does things like that. Some of his prophecies are not so much what he says as actually something that he does symbolically. But we jump right in chapter 1 with this first vision, and the reason I gave you that colored Xerox, that colored printout there, is an attempt. Different artists have attempted to draw or paint what he describes. And if you Google Ezekiel's vision of chapter 1, or Ezekiel's vision of God's chariot, Ezekiel's vision of God, Ezekiel's vision of the wheels within wheels, you'll get all kinds of drawings and paintings, and that one is as good as any. But as we read through this, you'll see trying to put on paper or paint what he describes is pretty challenging. So, here's how the book of Ezekiel starts. In the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kebar River. So this is in Babylon. Okay? The exiles who've already been taken to Babylon in that first wave of exiles. The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. And then he describes this, he gets to describe this vision. On the 5th of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, by the Kebar River in the land of the Babylonians. Sometimes the Babylonians are also called the Chaldeans. If you see Chaldean, it's the same thing as Babylonian. There, the hand of the Lord was upon him. And here we speak with the voice of Ezekiel. I looked, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was that of a man, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, Their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their four sides, they had the hands of a man. All four of them had faces and wings, and their wings touched one another. Each one went straight ahead. They didn't turn as they moved. Their faces looked like this. Each of the four had the face of a man, and on the right side, each had the face of a lion, and on the left, the face of an ox, and also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out upward. Each had two wings, one touching the wing of another creature on either side, and two wings covering its body. Each one went straight ahead. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, without turning as they went. The appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire, or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it, and the creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its four faces. This was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparkled like chrysolite, and all four looked alike. Each appeared to be made of a wheel intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any of one of the four directions the creatures faced. The wheels did not turn about as the creatures went. Their rims were high and awesome, and all four rims were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved, and when the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise along with them, because the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When the creatures moved, they also moved. When the creatures stood still, they also stood still. When the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose along with them, because the Spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. Spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked like an expanse, sparkling like ice and awesome. Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out towards one another, and each had two wings covering its body. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings, like the roar of rushing rivers, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. Then there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads as they stood with lowered wings. Above the expanse over their heads was what looked like a throne of sapphire, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him, like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. So was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking. So that's clear, right? I mean, that's...
UFO.
Well, you can, but there are people, there are people on, I think, the Discovery Channel and the History Channel and other places who that is exactly their theory. They said this was, he witnessed a UFO. That's what he saw. But, biblical scholars would say, one, remember, this is a vision. It's not a, it's not necessarily a sighting. It's a vision. And it's a vision of the chariot of God in many ways. The chariot of God. With these four living creatures as the, I can't say pulling the wagon, but as with the chariot of God. And, high above them is this throne, and the one on the throne is described as blinding light, fire, but one like a man, and it says it was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. It's like 3 steps removed. I mean, they're very, very careful, to talk about what does God look like. But it's the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So this is very similar to some of the imagery in the book of Revelation. And if you know, in the book of Revelation, it also has 4 living creatures that are very weird with, amalgamation of human and animal parts. But let's start just with their faces. The face of a man, and then a lion, an ox, and an eagle, each pointing in a different direction. And it was saying, what it's saying, they didn't move. In other words, this, they'd move this way, but then the lion, they'd move this way, and then the ox, they'd move this way, and then the eagle, they'd move this way. They were, the four faces were looking in the 4 different directions. But, you think, why those 4 things? Well, yeah, why those 4? Why a human and 3? Why those 3 animals as opposed to any other animal? I think first century, the idea that most scholars would say is, okay, the lion is the greatest of the wild beasts. The ox is the greatest of the domesticated beasts. And the eagle is the greatest of the flying beasts. And then, of course, there's human. That these represent, the wild beast, domesticated beast, birds of the air, and humans. And the wings, you're like, okay, they got wings, and the wings are covered with eyes, and the wheels are covered with eyes. Covered with eyes would probably mean what?
All seeing.
All seeing, yeah, all seeing. Seeing in every direction. Wheels within wheels is, are we talking about, sort of like we might call caster wheels, or, but they're able to move in all directions very quickly like lightning. And then above that is this expanse like ice and a rainbow. And there then is the throne of, as it says, the likeness of the glory, the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And this is God then revealing in this vision, the majesty and everything. I think is supposed to remind us of something. The eyes and the beasts and the lightning and the fire. It's all meant to this picture of magnificence and glory and power and majesty. And finally, after the description of this sort of heavenly chariot, we finally get the message of what he Ezekiel, already in Babylon, is to speak to the other Jewish exiles in Babylon. This is his message not to the Babylonians. This is his message to the Jewish exiles already in Babylon. Now, right off the bat, something that we might not immediately think of, but right off the bat, God appears to him, or this vision of God appears to him in Babylon. What is anything odd about that? God is the God of Israel and Judea. Here he is appearing in a foreign country.
Well, he has no boundaries.
Yes, Yahweh has no boundaries. The way that ancient people thought was, this is this nation and this is their God. And this God is over this nation. And then you go to the next nation and they got their own God. And that God is over those people. And it's almost like they don't cross the boundaries. That gods are like kings. And they have influence over their own people. But, several times in the Old Testament, they'll say, oh, they came into, Judea and they were getting, plagues and things like, oh, we need to figure out who the God of this place is. So we can worship him or placate him or give him an offering. That the idea that the gods are very localized, and if you leave that territory, well, that God he's over there. But for the Jews, this idea that God is not bound by territory. God, the God of the Jews is not only for a localized God. He is the God of the whole earth. He is the God of all creation. So he can show up in Babylon just as much as he can show up anywhere else. We're in Ezekiel chapter 2. That image is the image of that Ezekiel sees. And so he says to Ezekiel chapter 2, Son of man, stand up on your feet and I'll speak to you. As he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet, and I heard him speaking. He said, Son of man, I'm sending you to the Israelites. And all through Ezekiel, even though it is the Jewish exiles there in Babylon, he often simply refers to them as Israel, as in the unified nation. Not the post-separation Israel in the north, Judah in the south. When he says Israel here in Ezekiel, it means all 12 tribes. That has rebelled against me, and their fathers have been in revolt against me to this very day. People whom I'm sending you are obstinate and stubborn. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. And whether they listen or fail to listen, for they're a rebellious house, they'll know that a prophet has been among them. And you, son of man, don't be afraid of them, or their words. Don't be afraid, though briars and thorns are all around you, and you live among scorpions, which is not where I want to live. Boy, scorpions is about the scariest thing I can imagine. Don't be afraid of what they say, or terrified of them. For though they are a rebellious house, you must speak my words to them. Whether they listen or fail to listen, they're rebellious. But you, son of man, listen to what I say to you. Don't rebel like that rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. I looked and I saw a hand stretched out, and it was a scroll, which he unrolled before me. On both sides were written words of lament and mourning and woe. He said, Son of man, eat what's before you, eat the scroll, and then go and speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. He said to me, Son of man, eat this scroll I'm giving you and fill your stomach with it. So I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth. If you kind of remember, in the book of Revelation, something very similar happens. John is given a scroll to eat, and he eats it, and it tastes sweet at first and then turns bitter in his stomach. So he says, here's this message. I'm not going to read, he says, they're hard-hearted, they're stubborn, they're rebellious. This is repeated multiple times. And he finally says again, this is what I'm supposed to say. And then go down to 3:12. Spirit lifted me up. I heard behind me a loud rumbling sound. And the glory of the Lord be praised in his dwelling place. The sound of the wings of the living creatures brushing up against each other. The sound of the wheels beside them. A loud rumbling sound. The Spirit lifted me up and took me away. And I went in bitterness and in the anger of my spirit with the strong hand of the Lord upon me. I came to the exiles who lived at Tel Aviv near the Kebar River. And there where they were living, I sat among them for 7 days, overwhelmed. And this is where he's delivering. The Kebar River is where the Jewish exiles would gather to worship in exile. The warning is one we've read many times in other prophets. It's turn from your idolatry, turn from your rebellion, turn away. And he gives him some pretty unusual directions. He says, go speak to them and tell them that they're going to be held accountable for their actions. Look at 3:25. You, son of man, they'll tie you with ropes, and you'll be bound so that you can't go out among the people. I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth, so that you'll be silent and unable to rebuke them, though they are a rebellious house. But when I speak to you, I'll open your mouth, and you shall say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Whoever will listen, let him listen. Whoever will refuse, let him refuse. They're a rebellious house. We get the idea they're a rebellious house? Okay, now here's the next kind of odd thing in chapter 4. Now, son of man, take a clay tablet, put it in front of you, and draw the city of Jerusalem on it. Then lay siege to it. Erect siege works against it. Build a ramp up to it. Set up camps around it. And put battering rams around it. He's making this model of Jerusalem. Then take an iron pan, place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and turn your face toward it. It'll be under siege, and you shall besiege it. This will be a sign to the house of Israel. So see, not so much what he's going to say. He is going to build this model of Jerusalem and all these ramps of siege and things, and then he's going to lay down next to it. And this is the part that's like, I don't think I want this job. Verse 4. Then lie on your left side and put the sin of the house of Israel upon yourself. You're to bear their sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I've assigned you the same number of days as the years of their sin. So for 390 days you will bear the sin of the house of Israel. You're going to lay there for over a year. After you finish this, lie down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the house of Judah. I've assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. Turn your face toward the siege of Jerusalem, and with your bared arm prophesy against her. I will tie you up with ropes so that you can't turn from one side to the other until you finish the days of your siege. That sounds like bed sores are coming. You can't roll over at that point. But you say, well, how does he eat or go to the bathroom? I'm guessing he's doing this in shifts or somehow, because then he says, take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt, put them in a storage jar and use them to make bread for yourself. You're to eat it during the 390 days. You're to lie on your side. Weigh out 20 shekels of food to eat each day, and eat it at set times. Also, measure out 1/6 of a hin of water and drink it at set times. Eat the food as you would a barley cake. Bake it right into the sight of the people using human excrement for fuel. Well, that takes care of what do you do about the bathroom part. The Lord said, in this way, the people of Israel will eat defiled food among the nations where I drive them. So this, too, even this is an enacted action. Everything, the lying there, the siege of Jerusalem, the lying on the side, including even eating defiled food, it's all prophetic. It's all, we used to think of the cartoons of the guy, walking around in a robe that says the end is near, but this is the real deal. He's to lay there every day as a word of condemnation and warning to the Jewish exiles. So he says, eat and cook the food on human excrement. And then at that point, Ezekiel's like, well, okay, that's a little bit too far. He says, then I said, not so, sovereign Lord. I've never defiled myself. From my youth until now, I've never eaten anything found dead or torn by wild animals. No unclean meat has ever entered my mouth. Very well, he said, I'll let you bake your bread over cow manure instead of human excrement. Oh, well, thank goodness. Okay. Thank goodness we can use cow patties instead of human excrement. That will make it a lot better. What's the difference for a Jew? One's kosher and one's not. You could cook your food over cow manure, but you couldn't cook your food over human manure. One was kosher, one was not. No, see, he says, I've never eaten roadkill or an animal that was torn up by wild animals. That's because those things are not kosher. Those things are unclean. You can't eat roadkill. Or if you find an animal that's been killed by another animal, you can't eat it. And you can't cook your food over your own food. But you can use cow if you need to for fuel. Yum, right? Glad you ate right before you I'd like this concession. He's like, oh, come on. Really? Okay, cow manure. All right. And he said to me, Son of man, I'll cut off the supply of food in Jerusalem. The people will eat rationed food in anxiety and drink rationed water in despair, for food and water will be scarce. They'll be appalled at the sight of each other and will waste away because of their sin. This is all an enacted message about what's coming with this time of exile. Telling the ones who were already exiled, this is what's ahead of you, ahead of all of us, and the reason for it is the continual. What did he say about 100 times there? They're a rebellious house. They're a rebellious house. Then, chapter 5. Now take a sharp sword. Use it as a barber's razor to shave your head and your beard. Okay, that sounds safe. Let me give myself a haircut with a sword and cut my beard off with a sword. Again, I'm not sure I would do that very well. Then, take a set of scales and divide up the hair. When the days of your siege come to an end, burn a third of the hair with fire inside the city. Take a third and strike it with the sword all around the city, and scatter a third to the wind. For I'll pursue them with drawn sword. Now, this is all symbolic. All these things he's doing are symbolic, are a message not spoken, but enacted as a way of telling the people about what's the judgment that's coming on them.
Do they understand it? The people?
Well, I guess in some way they must. After he lays there for a year, surely they would come up and go, what's this about? What are you doing here? He doesn't forbid him from speaking. So I think we're to understand that there is some explanation that goes with these enacted things. But the point is that this is not just standing up and preaching. This is this very, in-your-face kind of, I won't call it a protest, but an enacted work of prophecy. I won't go into all of this, but this is how his ministry, his work as a prophet goes on. I'm going to jump ahead because Ezekiel is a fairly long book, and there's some parts of it I want to make sure we get to, because it's 46 chapters, 48 chapters. Okay, let's go over all the way to chapter 10. Another vision. Okay. Now, in chapter 10, we actually find out the name of those living creatures. You know what they are? They are cherubim. Or we would say cherubs. There are different kinds of angels mentioned in the Old Testament. There are cherubim and seraphim. Remember, in Hebrew, I am at the end is the plural. So, one cherub, two cherubim, one seraph, two seraphim. Okay, so, cherubim is the plural of cherub. So, when we, in the 21st century, when we think of a cherub, what do we think of?
Little baby.
Yeah, we think of these little babies, right? Little baby angels or something, right? Yeah, that is not biblical at all. There's nothing in the Bible about baby angels. There's nothing in the word cherub in the Bible describes a warrior angel, cherubim and seraphim. So these are cherubim, these living creatures. So, chapter 10. He's seeing the throne again. Chapter 10. I looked and I saw the likeness of a throne of sapphire above the expanse that was over the heads of the cherubim. The Lord said to the man clothed in linen, go in among the wheels beneath the cherubim, fill your hands with burning coals, ouch, from among the cherubim, and scatter them over the city. And as I watched, he went in. Now, the cherubim were standing on the south side of the temple. Okay, this is a vision. Even though he's in Babylon, he has a vision of the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, he has a vision of the temple in Jerusalem, which remember is not. He is sent into exile in 597 This is 5 years into his exile. The temple is not destroyed until 586. So the temple, the Babylonians have begun bringing people into Babylon, exiles, but they haven't knocked down the temple yet. At this point, this is somewhere around, 580, 589 or somewhere in there. But anyway, and I watched, and the cherubim were standing on the south side of the temple where the men went in. The cloud filled the inner court. Then the glory of the Lord rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. The cloud filled the temple. And the court was full of the radiance of the glory of the Lord. The sound of the wings of the cherubim could be heard as far away as the outer courts, like the voice of God Almighty when he speaks. That idea of the cloud, usually in the Old Testament, when they talk about the presence of God, it's a cloud. When Moses and the people are going through the desert, how does God lead them? Pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. When Moses goes up to Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments, what happens on Mount Sinai? The cloud descends on Mount Sinai, and he goes up to meet with God to receive the Ten Commandments. So usually, when the Old Testament talks about God's presence dwelling somewhere, it's usually just a cloud. So verse 10. When the Lord commanded the man in linen, take fire from among the wheels, from among the cherubim, the man went in, stood beside a wheel. One of the cherubim reached out his hand to the fire that was among them. He took up some of it and put it in the hands of the man in linen, who took it and went out. Under the wings of the cherubim could be seen what looked like the hands of a man. And it's more description of the wheels and the eyes and the wings and the this and the that. I'm going to jump down to 15. Then 10:15. Then the cherubim rose upward. They were the living creatures that I had seen by the Keba River. When the cherubim moved, the wheels beside them moved. And when the cherubim spread their wings to rise from the ground, the wheels didn't leave their side. When the cherubim stood still, and they also stood still. When the cherubim rose, they rose with them, as the spirit of the living creatures was in them. Here's the key verses, the next verse, 18. Then the glory of the Lord departed from over the threshold of the temple and stopped above the cherubim. While I watched, the cherubim spread their wings and rose from the ground, and as they went, the wheels went with them. They stopped at the entrance to the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the God of Israel was above them. They were the living creatures I'd seen beneath the God of Israel by the Keba River. I realized they were cherubim, and it describes them again. But that one verse is what's the significance. The presence of God leaves the temple. God's presence leaves the temple in Jerusalem, which is a way of saying it has been so corrupted by the Jews who have put idols in there, who have done all these things in there that were against the law, that God's presence, which if you go back to when they finished the temple and Solomon constructed the temple, it says that when they finished the temple of Solomon, the cloud descended on the temple. But now, the opposite has happened. This cloud is lifted up from the temple in Jerusalem, and it heads east, away from Jerusalem. The temple has become so desecrated that God's presence is now abandoning it. That's the key part of this, among all the wings and the eyes and the wheels and all that stuff. This is the judgment on Israel. Now let me jump again into a few chapters. Let's talk about false prophets over in chapter 13. Because they're already in Babylon, there are those who are saying, "Oh, well, this will be over soon. We'll go back home soon. It'll be all right. This is just we'll only be here maybe for a few weeks or months. It's going to be fine." The word of the Lord came to me, "Son of man, prophesy against the prophets of Israel who are now prophesying. Say to those who prophesy out of their own imagination, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the foolish prophets who follow their own spirit and have seen nothing. Your prophets, O Israel, are like jackals among the ruins. You have not gone up to the breaks in the wall to repair it for the house of Israel so that it will stand firm in battle on the day of the Lord. Their visions are false. Their divinations a lie. They say, the Lord declares, when the Lord has not sent them, yet they expect their words to be fulfilled. Have you not seen false visions and uttered lying divinations when you say, the Lord declares, although I have not spoken? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, because of your false words and lying visions, I am against you, declares the sovereign Lord. My hand will be against the prophets who see false visions and utter lying divinations. They will not belong to the council of my people or be listed in the records of the house of Israel, nor will they enter the land of Israel. You will know that I'm the sovereign Lord, because they lead my people astray, saying, peace, when there is no peace. And because when a flimsy wall is built, they cover it with whitewash. Therefore, tell those who cover it with whitewash that it's going to fall. Rain will come in torrents, and I'll send hailstones hurtling down, and violent winds will burst forth. And when the wall collapses, will people not ask you, where's the whitewash you covered it with? Whitewash is also kind of like plaster. So there are prophets who are saying, peace, peace, it's going to be great, it's fine, it's good. And he's saying, you haven't heard this from me. Which has, of course, always been one of the challenges, of Judaism and Christianity, when someone declares themselves a prophet. When someone says, God has told me X. And, all throughout the New Testament, they say, you have to test that. You have to, you can't, just because somebody says, well, God has told me X, Y, God has told me to send in your dollars to me. God has send in your seed faith gift, $77, and then all your bills are going to disappear because God has told me. Just because somebody says God told me X, Y, or Z doesn't always make it so. Jesus says, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, and I will say, I never knew you. So you have to realize that there are ways to test when someone says, God has told me X. I at least try to be very, very careful about ever saying, well, God has told me to do this. I believe the Bible is our main guide with that, at telling us what we need to be doing. And I think God will confirm His will in many, many ways, scripturally, other Christians, with, there's all kinds of ways that I think you can feel more confident about the will of God. But just somebody saying, God told me, or God says so, there have been false prophets as long as there have been, religions and people. A couple of the examples that I don't use in sermons because they're kind of, I don't want kids to hear them, but I still remember when I was before I'd gone to seminary. I think it was the summer before I went to seminary. I was working as an intern at Asbury. But since I was getting ready to go to seminary, among the rest of people my age, I was already the expert in God and Bible. Even though I hadn't gone to seminary yet, I was still kind of the one they looked to be, because I was more interesting. I read a lot more and all that, even by that point. So, we had a college group that I was a part of, and there was, as happens in any youth group or college group, there were two people who were dating. And one day, one of the girl in the couple called me on a landline. Yeah. This is really a long time ago. It was on a landline. And crying. And because she had decided to break up with her boyfriend. And she told him, it's just not working out. I think we need to stop dating. He's like, no, you cannot break up with me. God has told me that we are to be together. And she's like, think we should break up. No, he said. Because he had stopped going to Asbury and was going to Rhema. Name drop there. He was going to Rhema. And he said, no, God has revealed to me that we are to be together. We are going to be married, you and I. You cannot break up with me, because if you break up with me, you are disobeying God. So she calls me because I'm the expert, because I'm getting ready to go to seminary, and she basically is like, is that true? Basically, can he do that? Can he just say, nope, you can't break up with me because God told me you're to be with me forever? And I told her, even I knew enough to say, yeah, you can break up with him. Yes.
God told her that she could. God told her.
Yeah, that's right.
We have more reason now to do it than before.
Yeah. And that's just, and it's unfortunately, especially in more conservative churches, that tends to happen more frequently, where, well, God told me this, God said to do this, God did that. Way back in that same summer, and I'm still just not in seminary yet. The church Asbury then had a singles group, and came to find out there was a man who was in the singles group who would go out with women and then said, Jesus has told me that we're supposed to have sex. Jesus has revealed to me that and so you need to be obedient to Jesus, so take your clothes off, and he was doing this with multiple women in the group. Just because somebody says, God told me, that. So here Ezekiel is condemning these false prophets. And you have to realize that people will use the name of God sometimes in terrible, terrible ways. Think of David Koresh. All kinds of other examples of that. 14, again, idolatry condemned. Some of the elders of Israel came to me being Ezekiel, and sat down in front of me. Then the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, these men have set up idols in their hearts and put wicked stumbling blocks before their faces. Should I let them inquire of me at all? Therefore speak to them and tell them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. When the Israelite sets up idols in his heart and puts a wicked stumbling block before his face, and then goes to a prophet, I, the Lord, will answer him myself in keeping with his great idolatry. I'll do this to recapture the hearts of the people of Israel who have deserted me for their idols. Therefore say to the house of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Repent, turn from your idols, and renounce all your detestable practices. And again, on and on and on and on about idolatry. Chapter 15, a short chapter, he compares Israel to a useless vine. Son of man, how is the wood of a vine better than the branch of any of the trees? Is wood ever taken from it to make anything useful? Do they make pegs from it to hang things on? After it's thrown on the fire as fuel and the fire burns both ends and chars the middle, is it useful for anything? Basically, you can't use this vine as wood to make something substantial. And he says basically that's what the Jewish people have become. They are useless. They've been unfaithful. And they're going to be fuel for the fire. Now, the next allegory, or the next is of Israel, is how they are, calls them his child, and again, I'll read the whole thing, but it's Israel, the Jewish people are a child, and how they were born kind of just as an orphan laying there, covered in blood, nobody did anything, nobody helped them. It says, verse 6, I passed by, saw you kicking about in your blood. As you lay there in your blood, I said, live, and I made you you grow like a plant. You grew up and developed and became the most beautiful of jewels. Your breasts were formed and your hair grew. You were naked and bare. Later I passed by, and I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, and I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord. And he talks about how, he dressed her in costly garments and with jewelry, and, in other words, this is Israel, the bride of the Lord. How he treated her, like a queen. 16:14. Your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, because the splendor I had given you made your beauty perfect, says the sovereign Lord. This is the nation of Israel. 15. But you trusted in your beauty and used your fame to become a prostitute. You lavished your favors on anyone who passed by, and your beauty became his. You took some of your garments to make gaudy high places, where you carried on your prostitution. Such things should not happen, nor should they ever occur. You took the jewelry I gave you, the jewelry made of gold and silver, and made yourself idols and engaged in prostitution. You took the embroidered cloths and offered my oil for them, the food I provided, the flour, olive oil, and honey, offered as incense before them. Go on. This idolatry equals adultery, and not just adultery, but prostitution. And then he takes it even further in verse 20. You took your sons and daughters, whom you bore to me, and sacrificed them as food to the idols. Was your prostitution not enough? You slaughtered my children, sacrificed them to idols. In your detestable practices, in your prostitution, you didn't remember the days of your youth, when you were naked and bare, kicking about in blood. And, on and on and on, how you were, sleeping with anyone and everyone, and increased your lewd conduct and your prostitution, how even, verse 34, in your prostitution you are the opposite of others. No one runs after you for your favors. You're the opposite. You give payment and none is given you. In other words, she's paying others to sleep with her now. So, again, this idea of Israel is a unfaithful bride. So, again, more of the same. It's a rebellious house. That's said a whole lot. There's some poetry in 18 and 19. Again, more in 20. 20 verse 30. Say to the house of the Lord, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Will you defile yourselves the way your fathers did and lust after their vile images? When you offer your gifts, the sacrifice of your sons in the fire, you continue to defile yourselves with all your idols to this day. Am I to let you inquire of me, house of Israel? As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I will not let you inquire of me. You say, we want to be like the nations, like the peoples of the world, who serve wood and stone. What have you in mind will never happen. And this goes back, even all the way back to the book of Samuel. If you remember in the book of Samuel, what do the Israelites go to the prophet Samuel and say? We want a king. Why? Because everyone else has a king. All the other nations have a king, so we want a king. We want to be like the other nations. And, you could sort of divert this into how many times, in raising your children, your children say they want to do something. Well, why? Because everybody else is doing it. They want this thing. Why? Well, everybody else has one. That's as common as I want to be like everybody else. But in this case, to be like everybody else was to be having idols of stone and silver and wood, and to be cultic prostitution, and etc., etc., etc. That's what it meant to be like everyone else. And he says no. And basically says in chapter 21, Babylon is his sword of judgment against his rebellious people. And that's, again, something we see in these prophets over and over and over. Now, I've heard of pastors who took 3 or 4 years to literally preach the entire Bible, and I get to like Ezekiel 23. It'd be hard to preach this if there were anybody under the age of 18 present. Because it's the analogy that Israel in the north and Judah in the south are these two sisters. They became prostitutes in Egypt. This is 23:3. One was named Oholah, and her sister was Oholibah. And just in case we haven't gotten it, in verse it says Oholah is Samaria, in other words, the northern tribes, and Oholibah is Jerusalem, in other words, the southern tribes. So these are the two sisters, and they lusted after their lovers. All of them handsome young men. She gave herself as a prostitute to the elite of the Assyrians, verse 7. So this is the northern sister. Gave herself to the elite of the Assyrians, defied herself with idols, and etc. And I gave her over to her lovers. And then in 11, her sister saw this and her lust, and she lusted also after the Assyrians. But then she saw in verse 14 the Chaldeans. That's the Babylonians. She saw men portrayed on a wall, figures of Chaldeans portrayed in red, with belts around their waists and flowing turbans on their heads. All of them looked like Babylonian chariot officers and natives of Chaldea. As soon as she saw them, she lusted after them. And, on and on. And, matter of fact, then I'm not going to read verse 20. Look at 23:20, where she lusted after her lovers.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that would be tough to preach on.
Only once.
Yeah. You can let her see it. Yeah. I don't think I want to put that out on the internet. And I don't think it's in the Bible. It's a biblical. It's a Bible verse.
Oh yeah.
But it's pretty graphic in describing the prostitution of the two sisters. That'd be one of the. This feels like one of those verses. If a teenager found it and like, look what's in the Bible.
Yeah.
Huh?
Become a band.
Yeah, become a banned book. The analogies keep coming. The idea that of the boiling pot, or the cooking pot, is chapter 24, and how Israel is in a boiling pot until all the meat falls off the bones, etc. Then we kind of have a little odd interlude here, just at the end of chapter 24, well, the middle of chapter 24, when his wife dies, Ezekiel's wife dies, and we're like, he had a wife? I mean, she's not mentioned before this. 24:15, the word Lord came to me, Son of man, with one blow I'm about to take away from you the delight of your eyes. Yet don't lament or weep or shed any tears. Groan quietly. Don't mourn for the dead. Keep your turban fastened and your sandals on your feet. Don't cover the lower part of your face or eat the customary food of mourners. So I spoke to the people in the morning. In the evening, my wife died. The next morning I did as I'd commanded. And, he kind of goes on and says, this is also something that he prophesies about in verse 20. This is what the sovereign Lord says, I'm about to desecrate my sanctuary, the stronghold in which you take pride, the delight of your eyes, the object of your affection. The sons and daughters you left behind, who are still back in Jerusalem, will fall by the sword. And you will do as I have done. You won't cover the lower part of your face or eat the customary food. You'll keep your turbans on your heads and your sandals on your feet. You won't mourn or weep, but will waste away because of the sins and groan amongst yourself. Ezekiel will be assigned to you. You'll do just as he has done. And when this happens, you'll know that I'm the sovereign Lord. So, kind of like how do you stay married to somebody who lays on his side eating food cooked over cow dung for a year and a half? But anyway, 25 begins a whole chunk of prophecies against the neighbors. Prophecy against Ammon, the Ammonites, then against the Moabites in 25:8, then against the Edomites in 25:12, then against the Philistines in 25:15, then against the city of Tyre in 26:1, and then Tyre gets a whole lament. The Tyre gets a big chunk, and then we finally get Sidon over in 28:20. Egypt, finally, in 29:1. And here's what I said. Sometimes the Judea was thinking, the Egyptians are going to come to our aid and help deliver us from the Babylonians. 29:6. All who live in Egypt will know I'm the Lord. You have been a staff of reed for the house of Israel. When they grasped you with their hands, you splintered, and you tore open their shoulders. When they leaned on you, you broke, and their backs were wrenched. In other words, you were no use to Israel, you Egypt.
Were they paying them money to help protect them?
I'm not sure if they were paying him money or just hoping that, we got to do something to stop the Babylonians, so let's join together and drive them off back up north. And there's more lament for Egypt and a lament for Pharaoh. I'm not going to go into all those laments for the other countries. And then we finally, it says, remember, there's no Twitter, there's no Facebook, there's no easy means of communication. So he's among the first group of exiles in Babylon, but he was taken out of Jerusalem before the fall, before the fall of the walls and the fall of the temple. So, and new exiles just keep kind of coming in, and every year there's more exiles. But then in 33:21, in the 12th year of our exile, in the 10th month, on the 5th day, a man who had escaped from Jerusalem came to me and said, "The city has fallen." So, this is, he was there to see the Babylonians knock down the walls and the fall of the temple. The city has fallen. And the evening before the man arrived, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he opened my mouth before the man came to me in the morning. So my mouth was open, and I was no longer silent. Then the word of the Lord came to me, "Son of man, the people living in those ruins in the land of Israel are saying, Abraham was only one man, yet he possessed the land. But we're many. Surely the land has been given to us as our possession. Therefore say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Since you eat meat with the blood still in it," what's wrong with that? Not kosher. "And look to your idols and shed blood. Should you then possess the land? You rely on your sword. You do detestable things, and each of you defiles his neighbor's wife. Should you then possess the land?" It's like there's going to be wild animals and plagues and desolation, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Jumping down to verse 30. "As for you, son of man, your countrymen are talking together about you by the walls and at the doors of the houses, saying to each other," basically saying, "Hey, he was right." He said the city was going to fall, and now we get word, yeah, it did fall. Come and hear the message that's come from the Lord. In other words, he really is a prophet. "My people come to you, as they usually do, and sit before you to listen to your words. But they don't put them into practice. With their mouths they express devotion, but their hearts are greedy and unjust gain. Indeed, to them you're nothing more than one who sings love songs with a beautiful voice and plays an instrument well. For they hear your words, but they don't put them into practice." Wow, that's cool. He knew this was going to happen before it happened. Wow, that's kind of interesting. He's an interesting speaker. Now, I'm not going to do anything he says, but he's an interesting speaker. That's the point there. Now, when we get the word of the actual fall, the he hears, and of course, how many months does that take before, you know? But the tide starts to turn in this book then, about now that it actually has happened. The third act, and if you kind of, I don't know if you looked at your cartoon version here, but you know, if you look at the cartoon version, it kind of says, you know, there at the top, their cartoon of the throne, I like better than the painting, maybe, you know. It's got the 4 living creatures with the faces and the wheels and the glory above it at the very top. And the accusations against Israel in 1 through 11. Look there, 4 through 5, there he is laying on his side all tied up. And look at the tiny little, the food is cooking and the little sign pointing to what it's cooking on is, you know, kind of going like this. Yeah.
Little emoji.
Yeah. Israel's hard heart. And then you notice there the picture 8 through 11, you see that God departing the temple. See, that God is leaving the temple there in that cartoon where it says 8 through 11. You know. And then 12 to 24, you know, it has a rebellious wife, and etc. And then 25 to 32, the judgment on all the other nations, you know, Edom, Moab, Ammon, you know, that's the judgment. That all of them are going to fall before the Babylon. Then you get to chapter 33, Jerusalem has fallen. A little cartoon there. Then, when you get to 34, hope. You get to chapter 34, hope for Israel. So 34 through 48, we start to finally see, instead of doom and gloom and judgment, we start to see, but there's hope. But there's hope. And the most famous passage in all of Ezekiel is chapter 37. People don't know anything else about Ezekiel. They know something about 37, even if they have no idea where it came from. Because chapter 37 is the valley of the dry bones. So 37, Ezekiel 37. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, O sovereign Lord, you alone know. Why are you asking me? You know? He said, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to the bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I'll attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I'll put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound. And the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them. But there was no breath in them. And he said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come from the 4 winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. And then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We're cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. O my people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up out of them. I'll bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord. When I open your graves and bring you up from them, I'll put my spirit in you, and you'll live, and I'll settle you in your own land. And you'll know that I, the Lord, have spoken. I have done it, declares the Lord. So, as I said, this is the basis for the old Negro spiritual. Dim bones in, dry bones in, dry bones in, dry bones. Like one's connected to it, these one's connected to it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guarantee you, there's a lot of people who heard that song and has no clue where it came from. That it came from Ezekiel 37. But this idea of Israel in the Babylonian captivity is they're dead. And they're not just dead, they're bones. They're not just bones, they're dry bones. I mean, they are dead. And yet, he said, Israel is not dead. My people are not dead. They will live again. The nation will live again. The nation will come back to Jerusalem. The nation will rebuild the temple. There will be a rebirth. And this idea of, the bones start to put on tendons and things and finally skin. But what are they lacking? Breath. And I've said multiple times, in Hebrew, the word ruach is the word for breath, and it's the word for wind, and it's the word for spirit. It's the same word in Hebrew for all three of those things. Ruach can be translated wind, or breath, or spirit. So when you read that, and it says, verse 9, he said to me, prophesy to the ruach. Prophesy, son of man. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Come from the four ruachs, O breath, and ruach into these slain. And I prophesied, and ruach entered them. So each time it's the same word in Hebrew. That spirit came into them, breath came into them, the wind of God came into them. One thing that's interesting in chapter 38 is just a mention that pops up in another part of the Bible, which is pretty mysterious. 38, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, etc., 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 etc. Why is that significant? Well, look at Revelation 20. Go all the way to the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 20. Actually, 20 verse 7. This is at the end of what is usually called the millennium. 20 verse 7. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. In number they're like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, etc., etc., etc. So Gog and Magog make an appearance here in the book of Revelation that comes out of Ezekiel. Because remember, the book of Ezekiel is full of this same kind of apocalyptic literature as the book of Revelation, using imagery. Matter of fact, the imagery in the book of Revelation borrows from Ezekiel more than any other Old Testament book. So if you read some of these weird visions, like the creatures with the four faces and all that, and then you turn around and you read Revelation, you'll start to go, wait a minute, that all sounds familiar, because some of the imagery in Ezekiel is picked up in the book of Revelation. So the thing that really I want to kind of end with is this idea of hope. And so go over to, well, if you keep going, there's this idea of the rebirth of Israel, and there's going to be a new temple. And chapter 40 and 41 and 42 all are really descriptions of this new temple, which, is not the most fascinating part of whenever the Bible is describing, and there's this many poles and this many columns and this many drapes and things like that. That's when you want to go to sleep, you read that stuff. But, after it describes this new temple, chapter 43. Then the man, this is chapter 43, the man brought me to the gate facing east. This is of this new temple. And I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing rivers. The land was radiant with his glory. The vision I saw was like the vision I'd seen when he came to destroy the city, like the visions I had seen by the Kebar River. And I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. And the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. So, this goes back to when God left the temple and headed east. Now, here, it comes back from the east and comes back and fills the temple again. So this is the bookend to that, of God's presence and God's glory refilling the temple. And then the rest of it is a lot about, the holy days and the land and the priests and all the tribes and all of that. But really the climax of the book is there in chapter 43, when God's presence returned. So the book of Ezekiel is mysterious and sometimes, again, pretty puzzling when he's laying there on his side for a year, and as a way to send a message about the fall of Jerusalem. I think maybe it could have been easier to do it some other way, but that's how he was supposed to do it. And Ezekiel is one of the major prophets, and as I say, is quoted more, or his imagery is mentioned more in Revelation than any other Old Testament book. So you know that the author of Revelation was familiar with the book of Ezekiel. So I'm going to stop there to see if we have any questions about any of that.
I have a question. Is he teaching or preaching to small groups in the synagogue? I mean,
Well, there is no synagogue in Babylon.
Well,
it's just,
I mean,
the
they're little groups.
They're little groups by the Kebar River, yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
So that's how
you get the idea
very
that the
good.
exiles who were, when they were allowed to gather, that's where he's speaking to them. That they're not all like literally slaves. They're exiles, but they're not like literally in slavery in Babylon. And so, whenever the Jews would gather, and that he's a prophet among them.
I mean, is he able to travel? And I mean, I just kind of.
Yeah. I mean, we don't particularly know that. This is one of the, scholars differ on, sometimes, well, is this really from the words of Ezekiel? Most scholars really, this is all pretty much directly from Ezekiel. They feel pretty confident that this really is his prophecies. And that it was, because he's such an odd person in many ways, the way he made his points, the way God directed him to make his points. Notice again, back on the little cartoon again, it just says that in those last 8 chapters, it talks about the vision of a new temple, the outlines and plans for the new temple, but in the end, the idea of the Lord's presence is there. And if you want to learn a new Hebrew word, have you heard the word Shekinah? Have you ever heard the word Shekinah? Shekinah is a Hebrew word for the glory of the Lord. The Shekinah glory of the Lord. And, it's again in Pentecostal type churches, churches that are more charismatic than we are perhaps, they use that term a lot. They talk about the Shekinah glory, the glory of the Lord filling. Learn one new word every day. Other comments, questions about Ezekiel? Not a fun life for him. And yet, the message seems to have gotten through, because when the exiles do return, I say idolatry seems to no longer be an issue. It's like, what did it take to get it through their heads? What did it take to make Israel finally turn away from idolatry? Well, the exiles seem to finally, cleanse them, convince them, they finally turned away from idolatry. We don't really see it as an issue anymore when we get to Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, we still see injustice and them not being kind to the poor and the widow and the orphan. I mean, we still see sin, but we don't really see idolatry as a major issue after the Babylonian captivity.
Larry, I have some underlined in 36, now 25, talking about strengthening clean water. I will cleanse you from impurities and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you.
Right.
And
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That is one of the idea of a new heart and a new spirit is a message that then runs in the New Testament. The idea of a circumcised heart, of a new heart, and not a heart of stone, but a heart of flesh.
I saw that and went, oh, okay, hey, got to read a whole part.
Yeah, as I say, the latter part is kind of, it finally, at least at the end, it doesn't end on gloom and doom. It ends with hope, and which we're grateful for.
So about how long was it from his vision to when the Persians let them go back and rebuild their temple?
Well, they talked about it being 70 years, but it wasn't really quite 70 years. I think 586 was the fall of the temple. I want to say, let's see, 586. It was close. I think it was around 520. I'd have to look that up. I may be off by 5 or 6 years, but it's not quite 70 years, but it's close. I'd have to look it up in one of my charts, but it's like 2 generations, basically.
Okay.
Well, as I'm starting to cough, I better quit. So let me pray. Lord, thanks for these men, these prophets, these that are sometimes really challenging for us to read. It reminds us that you are a holy God, and you don't want us to stray and worship anyone or anything but you. And Lord, as we think about the heritage of our Judaism that leads into our faith, we are thankful that the Jewish people were able to continue to be a people when Edomites and Philistines and some of these others have lost in the pages of history, that you did preserve your people. And we pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We pray for peace in the Holy Land, and we pray for peace in our land as well. And go with us in the name of Christ.